Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the political presentation. Our general topic is networks between governments, international institutions, and civilians. So the presentation will be divided into two parts, into two subtopics. For each of them, there will be a case study followed up, and our first subtopic is international networks, how were they created, key agreements and treaties. The case study goes with this, is coalition of the willing. And our second subtopic is international networks, e-government forums, petitions, and political parties. The case study of this is anti-TTIP movement. And so what is exactly international political networks? The definition is that the relations of all actors involved in political activities in the widest sense can be subsumed in a comprehensive model of the political system. Studies in 2004 have demonstrated that government is increasingly shaped through networks. So all the relations between all the different actors in the political system, such as governments, parliaments, and public administrations on the national, regional, and local level, and political parties and organizations in civil society, and corporations, individual citizens, semi-public institutions can be all interpreted as political relations of powers and as relations of communication and information. So now Sandra will present our first subtopic.
Yes, so I will be talking about the international political networks. Historically, the starting point of international political networks as an institutionalized model can be seen with the founding of the League of Nations after the First World War. And since then, the primary goal of this international political network was to ensure peace and security worldwide by providing a forum for communication, forming agreements, and collaboration. And nowadays, this group can be seen by is provided by the UN, which was founded in 1945 after the Second World War. And unlike its predecessor, the UN provides a roof for almost all internationally recognized states. Therefore, it has an inclusive approach in terms of the participation. However, many other public organs are involved nowadays in the international political network. There are supranational organizations where the power is delegated from the member states towards the organization, and then the organization can act rather independently of the opinions of the nation states. And of course, the most famous example is the EU. But then there are other public bodies such as international organizations where national states work together on an intergovernmental level, so there no power is delegated, and the organizations can carry out actions only after an agreement is reached between the nations involved. And within this rough network, international laws are created and military bonds are formed or economic agreements. However, the exact configuration of stakeholders that are involved heavily depends on the topic discussed and the relevance it has internationally. For example, some areas of international political collaboration only involve a certain region or certain military allies. And in other cases, national states also negotiate informally, so without the umbrella of an international organization. And moreover, the influence of non-public bodies, as you can see here, also varies according to the policy area and according to how much the policy area touches the interests of third parties. And therefore, it's important to notice that there's no such thing as one international political network, because there are actually a lot of different ones within the system. There are permanent ones like the UN, or also temporary ones, such as the example that Jenny's going to talk about in a minute. There are also different subdivisions and different configurations of states involved depending on the topic. So yeah, now Jenny's going to take over and analyze a case study.
Thank you. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Coalition of the Willing. The Coalition of the Willing was formed by the former President George W. Bush Jr. after the attacks on US soil of September 11. The goal of this coalition was to neutralize the alleged threat of Saddam-ruled Iraq, which the US claimed supported al-Qaeda and also had weapons of mass destruction. The initial coalition was made up of 35 nations, which varied in size and military capability. The invasion of Iraq began in Kuwait and officially ended with the withdrawal of US troops. I think it was a few years ago now. But what most people see and understand from...
Sorry.
George. Coffee break.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Well, nice having you here.
Alright, good luck, guys.
Thank you, thanks. Okay, so as I was saying, what most people understand and see of the Coalition of the Willing was through its actions and achievements, or lack thereof, in Iraq. But it can also be understood and viewed as an example of an international network. It may seem like an abstract idea, but it is an example of an international network for a number of reasons. It's most clearly or most easily seen as an international network if you attempt to visualize it, where you see the US at the center of the network because they were the ones who initiated the formation of the network. And then you find the active and strong network member participants such as Britain and Australia in the central circle of that network, with other members of the Coalition of the Willing who weren't able to offer tangible support, and their pledge of support was merely symbolic. You'll see them on the outer part of the network. You can see how it behaves almost in a spiderweb formation with the US at the center. And another reason for this is that also, in essence, it was a group of autonomous entities. They were nation states. So as Sandra mentioned earlier, it wasn't a supranational network. It was simply a group of nation states who decided to work together for a common goal and to share communication and resources between each individual entity. And obviously it's an international network because it was sovereign nations working together as opposed to non-national bodies or civil society. It's important to note that the Coalition of the Willing was a fluctuating temporary network that had a semi-hierarchical system, because it was fluctuating because in the beginning it had 35 nations who were part of the network, and by the end it only had 25. And temporary because once the goal was achieved, or the war ended, because I'm not sure the goals really were achieved, the network dissolved. And it was semi-hierarchical because it was very much the case that the US had more power within the network than, say, some of the periphery members of the network. And it's one final thing I do think, the reason that the UN symbol is here was because this is an example of a temporary network that was formed through the use of a permanent network, which was the UN, even though it wasn't something that was sanctioned by the UN or given approval by the UN, but it was still formed through the connections made through the permanent network of the UN. So I hope that was interesting. I'm going to give the floor now to Deanna, who is going to talk about our second subtopic.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about international networks, e-government, forums, petitions, and political parties. Social networks, they analyze the relationship between individual actors that rely on links and individual actors that rely on hidden yet important information. And they are an important tool because we can use them to analyze the political parties and their multifaceted behavior. And the reason why political parties are a network is because they don't have a hierarchy or a specific set of who is who and what does and who does what. They are just a bunch of activists and candidates and office holders, and they try to influence the government. So the social network approach to this is how donors can benefit a party nomination. So how legislators can show their support, how can they build coalitions, and to which extent are interest groups linked to political parties. So the theory behind this studies the relation between social networks and political parties. So this allows us to see how political parties can work towards fulfilling common goals. And an example of this is informal networks of political elites that try to conspire and influence the results of, for example, the primary results right now in the States. Donors are also part of this network. So parties with more donors obviously will have higher chances of having a position in office. And the candidates that receive donations from well-off donors and well-known donors are usually more likely to do well in elections. And the reason why these networks exist is to influence power over elections, so candidates are easily tied to the networks that win. And political parties focus on one-sided networks, and they do research to find communities of donors, and they also analyze social networks and connections in order to find the best and most suitable donors for their benefit. And now Felix will move on for our case study.
Yes, thank you. The anti-TTIP movement is the case study for the intranational movements that function as a social network. First, let me briefly say what TTIP is, otherwise I think it's hard to say. TTIP is a trade agreement that was already supposed to be finalized in 2014 between the US and the EU. But probably now, as experts estimate, is only going to be finalized as 19 or 2020. It's very controversial. It should reduce trade barriers, but people feel it reduces standards for food safety and environmental safety, for example. Also, there's a very controversial point that are courts that are outside of the general national legal system that operate there, what people call shadow courts. Yes, sorry. It is multinational, the anti-TTIP movement, because of course the TTIP in itself is multinational, but the people who mostly lead this anti-TTIP movement are NGOs of different sizes, unions, labor unions for example, and political parties. Mostly there were initiatives on the grassroots level that were long-standing and against other topics before that had to do, for example, with international trade, that now make it able to build it up. Therefore, the scope and the action is also international, is all over the European Union. They use different platforms that can be mostly websites. You can find a lot of anti-TTIP and anti-CETA, which is the other trade agreement with Canada, websites that try to gather information and build a network in a sense that people can inform themselves and can inform themselves about action days where they should be there. But also forums exist where people can share their ideas about it and how to best tackle what they view as a problem. It has an active representation to the world. It includes demonstration that, for example, there was a demonstration with 150,000 people in Berlin, and this week there will be another demonstration in Hanover. So it is very much active, and they try to show that a lot in order to gather more public support against it. This includes many people, therefore you can see the network approach. This is also done through petitions. Petitions is an initiative that is now enabled through the Lisbon Treaty for the European Union that it needs minimum 1 million signatures of different countries. The movement started the petition that now has 3.4 million signatures after this 1 year period. This shows how much it's important to influence the public and link them to each other to gain a political movement. Also, they're connected to political parties. There's the European Green and the European Left party that support this initiative, that are against the TTIP movement. They also organize demonstrations. Therefore, they connect with the demonstrators, they connect with the initiatives, the NGOs, and the local grassroots initiatives. They, from there, gather political movement, because every big demonstration will be in the media, will gather public support and votes in the end for their party. This can then lead to the achievement of a common goal. As Diana stated before, it's very often that political parties engage with NGOs, international, and through platforms like the media. Yes. Now we'll give it the conclusion.
So technology is getting more and more important in communication and information. It becomes more worldwide, open, and available to everyone. For instance, people have the social media provides people the access to know the ongoing foreign and international issues, and it also provides opportunities for citizens to know that, to be aware of what the government does in the public sectors. So it sort of reduces the distance between individual citizens to the government and the public actors. So it creates transparency and accountability. It also the information also gain importance in terms of security and economy. Like surveillance and information gathering, for example, like intelligence department and data analyze. So and moving on, international security needs international collaboration. For example, like NATO and Europol and Frontex, they need information exchange. And also, international competition is a virtual and informal networks. Seeks to facilitate the cooperations between competition law authorities globally. So they also need information exchange and that kind of things. And so, in conclusion, with the evidences that are provided, technology is getting more and more vital, and there are pros and cons in terms of networks between governments, international institutions, and surveillance. And political actors are getting stronger through different networks from other institutions' surveillance. And also in the meantime, political networks is becoming a worldwide connection. So thank you for your attention. This is the end of our presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Wait for